what's the best mix of taverns and town halls? And just to give the audience a little bit of context and background here for the language we're using, we're thinking of taverns as those digital spaces where people are boisterous, the conversation is pretty free-flowing. Think like a Discord or Telegram channel, versus town halls are often the places where governance decisions and conversations are happening, mostly discourse or chartverse. So I think, John, we'll start with you and ask, what's the best mix of tavern and town halls for a community?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I wish I could be like, here's the exact structure, but I think what's like so cool about this is that we're seeing a bunch of different iterations and experiments on what the right balance is. For me, I think there's like a couple prongs that I kind of analyze it on. It's like one, kind of like, what is the general sentiment of your community? Like for me personally, I prefer the town hall because I like asynchronous. I like things more organized. I'm not constantly there. Whereas I think a lot of people like that tavern. They like it to be boisterous with memes, really loud. They're constantly there. It's like more synchronous, kind of like real-time communication. So I think it's like kind of like, you know, you have to consider what your community is, kind of what their personal preferences is, and then you also have to figure out what is the mandate of your entity. Are you trying to just be more of like a social gathering, sentiment, really retail focus, or are you really trying to get things done? Do like really tangible decisions have to be made to like for you to be successful, right? So, you know, I know that's really a non-answer, but it's really a case by case. And what's fantastic is there's a lot of great implementations of each of these kind of tavern and town hall-esque tools, and just pairing them together in thoughtful ways is something that each community manager really has to do themselves.
That's great, but we will dock 100 points for the non-answer. Anjali, so Collabland for several years now has really served almost like the bouncer for the taverns, the Discords, the Telegram channels. You know, how do you all advise the communities using Collabland to maintain kind of a lively atmosphere, but also keep the trolls at bay?
Yeah, that's actually, I come from digital communities before crypto, as an admin and as a mod for many digital communities, mostly around international adoption and homeschooling. That was my previous iteration of my life. I was a full-time caregiver to my children. And the amount of troll management that we do now and communities have to do now is so much less because of token gating, really. Like, people need to have they have to buy in, right? Like, they've got to have skin in the game. And once they do, then it makes it easier. As far as like how to keep it fun, how to keep it interesting, like we're also a distributed team. And so much of what we do obviously is work. However, without that time, social time built in, like mandated social time where we're getting to know each other, we notice the difference. If we don't take that time, if we don't take that Friday time to play a game together and get to know each other a little bit better, kind of keep tabs on each other, how people are doing socially, it makes a tremendous difference on how much work we get done the next week. So taverns and town halls have to work hand in hand. I mean, we're all separate, right? We're here at ETHDENVER. I mean, it's so important for us to all be at IRL events. Like, I love being able to hug you and give you a kiss on the cheek. Like, it matters because the next time we talk, we have that now. So of course, IRL relationships are super important. However, when you don't have that, you still have to have the tavern. Without it, like, you get less work done. You need to be able to know where people are coming from. So one thing we tell our admins and mods is like, commit to a calendar, commit to a content calendar. If you show commitment to your community, then they're gonna show a commitment back to you. So I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's great. We'll give you 50 points for that answer. You know, moving on to Alex, in some ways, Charmverse is really meant to be the town hall, or if not, you know, fight back on that. But you know, how do you make sure that conversations are getting to the town hall? How are you all advising communities to use Charmverse's proposal system and forums to really come to good consensus decisions?
So I came from Web 2, and I remember like 10 years ago, I wrote a blog post about complaining how many messages my team is sending over in Slack. I think Slack sent me an email saying like, congratulations, like your team have wrote 100,000 messages or something like that. And I was like, that's 100,000 messages of almost too much. So I think to me, like, yeah, it's deeply important to me that finding a place where, yes, people building relationship with your coworker, with your community is important, but also having a place to help you focus and get the important things done. So yeah, as we enter Web3, just seeing all these messages in Discord, and we find it challenging. And I think what's important is having a dedicated place that people can be orienting themselves to. Like, if I am here to submit a proposal, to discuss a proposal, or I'm here to apply for a grant, you want to just communicate only thing about the grant, that's a place to go to, and not being dropped into a forum and trying to figure out like your way and trying to search and spend an hour reading everything just to find that one place that you wanted to figure out what's happening.
That's great, and I'll drop the game show shtick at this point. But Charlie, as the Forecaster Maxi on the panel, where does Forecaster fall in all of this? Is it going to be a tavern, town hall? Like, what's the future of this kind of like crypto darling of the moment?
So that's questions. The difference for me for town halls and taverns is like town halls is a great place to like get things done and be organized, but they really go hand in hand with taverns, which I think is a great place to build community, build identity, build memes, and I think those are all so important in DAOs. I think having like a culture of identity is really important, and I think it's something that extends. You just see flavors of it across chains, across apps, across currencies, and so I think town halls and taverns really go hand in hand together, and I think you really need both. And Farcaster is doing a really interesting job with one of their primitive features of Farcaster is things called channels, which are very similar to like Reddit channels, and they have a lot of NFT and gated features built into it. So I think those really fill the need of a tavern. This is where everyone's hanging out, they're talking about your product, they're sharing links, they're sharing frames. Frames are like little mini apps that get built into Farcaster. So those serve as a great community building like feature. And then we're actually using token gated groups, so you can actually create groups of people with NFTs, and those end up serving very much as like a town hall, where you just limit the people who are participating and try to have a lot more organization. So that's kind of like the use cases right now, but I think Farcaster's working on a lot more primitives outside channels, and I think we'll continue to add flavors in ways to bring a lot more governance and organization to groups of people.
That's great. Yeah, and I think for taverns, the important part is kind of having a bouncer to keep the trolls out. But for the town halls, how do you make sure that you're balancing getting the most educated, high context people participating in those, with also not excluding the gen pop, so to speak? This question goes to John.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, because it's like trolls is a big deal, right? On the one hand, they're some of the most engaged people you're ever going to have in your community, but a lot of times they can be extremely disruptive. So I think there's a couple considerations I think is interesting. Like, it was already mentioned, right, about like just token gating something. That's really easy to make sure somebody has skin in the game. Oftentimes when you're like, hey, if you hold at least one token or one NFT, that'll exclude a lot of people, because at least they have some skin in the game. Like, it's very easy for people to be extremely negative when they don't really know about something, or they just have a cursory understanding, but they've actually bought in a little bit. That screams some. That being said, very motivated trolls, it's not that hard to buy one NFT oftentimes, unless it's prohibitively expensive, so you'll still get them. I think kind of the other consideration is like, how do you kind of, one, use reputation to inform a better understanding of, should I be listening to this troll as much? Like, obviously, if they're a massive whale in the community, they have a huge amount of skin in the game, you should probably listen. They're probably not trolling themselves, right? There's probably something there that you might want to unpack. Maybe you don't agree with it, but you should definitely consider it. I think the other piece of it as well is there's some people who maybe don't have that much skin in the game, right? They're just constantly being negative. One of the things that I found very interesting is that there's one community that I was a part of, and we had one or two people who were like just constantly negative about things. And what we ended up doing was we ended up pulling them in and being like, hey, we would like you to start an ambassador program to improve the community. We're going to give you a tag on Discord. We're going to have like little meetings with you, right? We're going to kind of like involve you. And the craziest thing happened was all of a sudden they were the biggest advocates for the community. Other trolls came in and they were like, hey, no, like, let's have a one-on-one, let's talk, and they actually like, trolls converted to the best ambassadors that I've ever seen, and actually
well, they're passionate, right?
Exactly.
They're already passionate, and that is what we're all needing. Like apathy is the killer, right? And so if they're passionate, you can turn them around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I wanted to follow up with Anjali. And how does Collabland, one, empower communities to deal with trolls, and two, kind of what do you all do to help those communities manage trolls? Like, can you boot people with Collabland? Can you take away NFTs? Or is it really up to the community to kind of use your tool as they see fit?
Yeah, we cannot take away NFTs. People ask all the time about that. No, we cannot take away NFTs, but you can ban people. And the beauty of it is with token gating, yes, you can ban them from access to your group if you're not behaving in a way that is conducive and constructive for the group, but we're not taking away their NFTs, right? Just because you're losing access to the community does not mean you're losing access to the value that's being created from the community. And I think that's what makes this world, right? Crypto, blockchain, whatever, NFTs, assets, so different and unique. It's like you do have to behave within the rules of the community, but that doesn't mean you lose your financial stake in it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I guess, Charlie, back to you. Where do you see Farcaster, I guess, going in terms of adoption, and what communities are joining, you know, especially in the gaming space? Is there a future for Farcaster, or is it a little bit kind of like flavor of the month in crypto, which we do a lot of that?
Yeah. So I was talking to someone else about this. If you're not immediately skeptical by like something that's getting a lot of hype in crypto and it like kind of bursts onto the scenes, you haven't been in crypto long enough. I feel like we see these things all the time. Like something blows up and there's so much FOMO and so much hype. And like, if you don't come into that with like an immediate lens of skepticism, you will. If you're in this space for long enough, you'll get burned enough times. You'll back a project that was a rug. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that gets built in this space that ends up not fulfilling its initial promise. But I do think Farcaster stands above that. I think Farcaster is one of those things that I tell a lot of people, it's the most excited I've been about a set of technology since I went to my first Ethereum meetup in 2015. I think some of the stuff that they're building as like the primitive layers for social engagement, it rivals the technology of like smart contracts. And I really do think it's going to completely change how a lot of apps work on the internet. And so I'm on the Farcast Maxi is bullish, big surprise. But I do think that it has a lot of core primitives of things that take a lot of effort to do with the current tech stacks. Like a lot of what we do on the internet is just navigating a social feed and then constantly getting redirected to other apps, and apps that make that process more seamless and more interesting tend to do better. But on Farcaster, you get to do a lot of stuff within the feed and within the forum and in the context that is most interesting. So no, I don't think it's a fad. I think it's definitely here to stay. And I feel like we're going to start seeing a lot more builders and a lot of people looking for really great integrations to leverage the distribution that you'll get through something like Farcaster.
Yeah, and I guess maybe just to tack onto that, because it's like for us, we've done a lot of work with like the Twitter integration, and we start looking and we're like at scale for a community to do something thoughtful and engaging on Twitter. We're talking like 20 to 30K a month API access for Twitter. We look at Farcaster, it's run a node. And if you start thinking, okay, what if we redirected that maybe in half, 10 to 15K a month into actually developing things for Farcaster? That's why I'm really excited about it, right? Like by having that kind of like open protocol and allowing like this kind of like flexible, like kind of client, or even build your own client on top of it. It's really leaning into the reason why I got into Web3 was because like we don't want to be limiting the creativity of people that we're working with or the community that's around us. I mean, just adding on to that, I'm also bullish Farcaster.
Yeah, I'll add on Farcaster too, so I'll talk about Farcaster. So we took a totally different route. We actually made frame available in Chamverse, so you can actually embed the frames. So in a way, like instead of putting the information into the feed, you can now actually take the frame into Chamverse. So then if you build Farcaster frame that is disappearing in the feed, you now have a place to store your frames and discuss the frame and share people the frames that you build in Farcaster. So kind of go both ways.
That's really cool. And just a little more context, if you're not aware, Farcaster frames are just like a base set of code that allows you to build essentially like mini applications within Farcaster. So imagine scrolling through a feed and then an item shows up that's basically like a little mini app that has some constraints. So
And Anjali, I'd love I always think of Collabland as the OGs of mixing crypto, blockchain with social spaces and gating them, probably just because that was like, I think I was part of one of the first experiments in Metacartel of token gating a channel in Telegram. How are you guys thinking about Farcaster or the future of social in the space? Like, where's Collabland's mind at around all this?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're still so early. I'm excited about Farcaster. However, we've also seen other Web3 native platforms come and go. So I'm excited about Farcaster. It's got so much great stuff. Like, I was at 2 different Farcaster events in Paris last week. I love the people there. It's of course they're wonderful, and I'm excited for Farcaster. I hope it makes it. However, it's still early. I think there's still a need to be in places that are more Web 2 focused to onboard more. So it's like filling 2 separate niches. We've got Collabland, like we're on Telegram and Discord now. We're looking at other platforms as well, Web 2 platforms, for a larger group of people to enter, right? It's like top of the funnel. But for everyone to eventually go to Farcaster, or once you're more sophisticated enough and you're more involved in Web3 to move to Farcaster, I think that's great. So I think there's room for more. And so our approach is still more at the mass onboarding stage.
Great, no, I love that. And we go back to Chris a little bit and shift towards the town hall, since I think we've talked a little bit more about the taverns so far. How do you get attention to the town halls? Traditionally, and maybe other than John, people resist residing there because it's not as exciting, it's not as fun, and it's meant to be serious and thoughtful conversations, not just kind of like meme posting. But how do you make the experience engaging so that it gets the attention it deserves?
Yeah, so put on my product hat a little bit, right? So instead of counting daily active users, our North Star is more weekly active or monthly active users. Partially for that reason that we don't expect people to come and socialize on a daily basis or multiple times a day compared to your Facebook, your Farcaster, your other social platform, right? So I think the key is having those. You came to Charmverse for a reason, right? Like you're not really here to hang out. You're here to either have a serious discussion about a certain topic, you're here to apply for a grant, you're here to check on the proposal that you submitted, or having these structured discussion going back and forth. So I think it is much more purposeful. And I think with that I think a big part of it is earning your reputation, building your reputations, so that because again, this is something that you are building toward something, and having more that higher influence and decision making along the process of the community. I think that's what get people coming back to contribute to the community in a little bit less exciting manner, or less fun manner, perhaps.
So does that mean that the future of DAO governance, especially in the town hall, looks closer to the IRL town halls, where it's mostly filled with elected officials and occasionally some old retired folks that come yell at them?
I think partially is that, but I think it's more about people who write proposals, people who submit for grants or RFPs and so on. They care deeply. Right, they care so deeply. They spend the time to write this 1-page, 5-page thing that they show up to. Maybe this is people that are retired, but also that I think it fundamentally people who care deeply about the community that they're showing up for. And I don't think we should demand that every single person you just happen to hold an NFT or part of the social conversation to also have to read your 3-page proposal and vote on it. I don't think that's reasonable.
Yeah. So John, direct democracy or something more like a republic?
Yeah, well, it's to kind of go back to your first question, right? It's does it look more like these elected officials, right? Or does it look more like this more direct democracy? I think blockchain and DAOs and a lot of these structures make it a lot more efficient and easier to do direct democracy. The problem is always people who spend time, who's actually going to read and understand kind of that problem. And so what you're already seeing is even in these more direct democracy approaches for a lot of these decentralized communities, that it's kind of how do you describe it? It's more kind of like signaling from the people who are very well known in the community, right? And even for elections, oftentimes it's more of a popularity contest. So one of the things that I'm like a huge advocate of is just like having to be much more meritocratic, where it's not like a popularity contest. It's not like the person who has the most kind of followers on Twitter or X, at this point. It's really, you can granularly understand what have been their contributions to the community, and based on that standing, I think that they should have more autonomy, more agency to like help represent or be elected ideally. But I do think that we start to trend toward some people are either elected in a position to make decisions, or people are just seen as kind of like signals for the community, that they're like, hey, here's the reasons I'm voting this way, and people oftentimes trust them. Because like we can try to make things more efficient and more democratic, but at the end of the day, I mean, like not 100% of your community is going to read the 10-page proposal. They're not going to follow the entire discussion. They're not going to have the context, right? And so I think for me, it's like that battle between how do we basically make things more meritocratic so that ideally we have more of those high signal people and more of those people who are maybe elected actually deserving to be that status. And then how do we make things more efficient, more digestible, more easily kind of like available to the general community so we can have more direct democracy. But yeah, for me, it's meritocracy, kind of reputation. That's like, I absolutely love that. I'm a huge proponent of it. So yeah.
I got a plug for AI there. I mean, really, that's how it's all going to come together, right? Like, how else are you going to get all that information distilled for everybody? Like, that's a natural fit.
So you stole my next question, which is great. No, I'd love to keep exploring is like, obviously AI is another topic du jour and more of the kind of broader zeitgeist outside of crypto. How does it change DAO communities? How does it change what, sorry to do more of a down the line question. How does it change what each of you do, both to kind of like help people digest more, but also is there a downside of like we're playing into people's laziness even more?
I will tell you, last year at ETHDENVER, we had a bounty, and the winner of the mini app was an AI mini app. And it was, at that point, you weren't able to just put documents up into whatever ChatGPT and have it respond. So it's a mini app where you can put in your documents, and that way it helps with onboarding, because mods and admins are completely drained from answering the same question over and over and over again. And so even with that, like wanting more people to participate, you need to have that information available and being able to say, like, what is the sentiment of this group right now? I'm joining this new group. I want to know what are the popular topics that are happening, what are the conversations, and what has been the mood over the last week or two. I mean, like, you're going to be able to get so much more information that way, which is going to encourage more involvement. So it's kind of an exciting thing. I mean, as far as downside, I don't know. There's a lot of downside, but for what we're talking about here, I think there's a lot of upside.
Nice. So when the Terminators take over, Alex, how are they interacting with Charmverse? What's the kind of future of AI there?
So there's a lot of excitement around text generation and summarization, but I actually think in terms of community, what's more exciting about AI is like really gleaning the contribution and interactions of people and how they're really contributing to the community, being able to pull out those minor interactions and not only using like the most basic signals like someone saying GM or whatever. I think like that's where it gets interesting of like helping find those people who should be more involved or can more influence in the community. And then I guess the AI overlord can find those people and talk to them.
Yeah, Charlie, we'll go to you and then finish up with John. Does AI ruin Farcaster? I mean, in many respects, blockchain is somewhat the opposite, and it's all about self-custody, the human layer interacting as self or pseudonymously, owning your identity, owning your own money. Like, what does AI do to something like Farcaster?
Well, I think the underlying like niceties of Farcaster is like guaranteed cryptographic proofs that message came from someone, because it is like a decentralized blockchain and decentralized data. So I don't know if like the world's quite ready for just how much content is going to be made over the next couple years. This election cycle is going to be absolutely nuts. Like the amount of propaganda and just insane stuff that's going to come out over the next 6 months, I just don't think we're ready for. And being able to tell where that information came from and being able to quickly verify that it's authentic is going to be paramount. And so I think that AI lends itself really well to a social graph or a social media network that has more cryptographic proofs that you're seeing a video from someone that isn't a deep fake and is real, because these things are going to be impossible to distinguish in a very near timeline. And so I think social networks being built on blockchains are going to be critical, because there's going to be way too much content. It's going to be way too hard to verify all the sources. And so you'll need signatures, and you'll need more cryptographic proofs of that data or content that you're seeing is from the person you think it is. And that's going to be a real challenge on like Twitter and X over the next 6 months. This is going to be a crazy election year for a lot of reasons, unfortunately, but content's going to be one of those things.
Yeah, and I guess, John, what does AI do to that meritocracy where you're trying to find the best people for the town hall, but all of a sudden now you can have ChatGPT write your proposals and make you seem kind of smart?
Yeah, because I think it's like there's two things. When I think about AI, right, like obviously there's a lot of stuff moving very fast, right? It's like I think they maybe start off on the stuff that I'm excited about. It's like one, being able to synthesize a community's kind of like content. Most people have documents like here's our shared ethos, our values, like our documentation, like getting people spun up very quickly, and then having a bot be able to engage those people and spin them up. It helps because like there's only so many ambassadors at scale, right? And so I think like as far as kind of like making people feel more welcome and getting spun up more quickly to like self-select into maybe like a larger role kind of within the community, that's something I'm really excited about. I also think that like from a community manager standpoint, being able to kind of like measure sentiment, like as mentioned, right, where it's like if I could see the snapshot of all 9,000 messages and be like, hey, people are generally kind of pissed in my community and it's about this keyword that keeps coming up, I think that's compelling. But directly to your point, the thing that I am concerned about is that, if you look, it's bots is always a problem, right? When we're trying to figure out how to make some Sybil-resistant system, it's just this constant game of cat and mouse. And so I think really identity and reputation and kind of like effort is a really important piece of that. And so I think right now we're thinking of it in kind of like one way, but I think as AI becomes more ubiquitous, it's like, when you can train an autonomous agent to fill out a type form, to be very engaging, to write a proposal, to write a really thoughtful kind of like, rebuttal against somebody else's proposal, right? It's like, it's going to get very odd, when it's like, how do you kind of distill down from the average very motivated community member and the average very motivated autonomous agent, right? And so I think it starts to get a little bit weird. It's something that we're watching, but I think we're all kind of seeing it unfold together, so.
Yeah, I think it's particularly, this is a unique thing in crypto, that there's such an incentive to pretend to be an engaging member because you're farming tokens and you're hoping that you'll get token. Like and of course there are bots and trolls in Web 2, but like just the magnitude and the sophistication, it's so different in crypto.
Yeah, and I think that's for us. It's like it's been predicated on like engagement, right? Because it's like I think a lot of people are like, hey, if you have kind of like this token or you do this KYC process or but it's like it's really just a game of cat and mouse, because it's like as soon as people start using that and they're like, hey, this is a very good Sybil resistance method, there's a market for that immediately. People are like, oh, I'm willing to sell my token, I have this, I don't care, so it's like it's this game of cat and mouse. And so I think the way that we're thinking about it is like if you can granularly kind of like measure and reward and incentivize engagement, you're kind of continually moving like that line of like where people need to be, right? If you're continually allowing them to engage and kind of like you're seeing kind of what their engagement has been in a granular way, then sure, with enough time and effort, this is why we're calling it Sybil resistant instead of Sybil proof, right? Unless I'm like standing right next to you, and seeing you kind of engage, it's like really hard. So anything digital makes it challenging. But I think like continually moving that goalpost and like having engagement, at a certain level of engagement, it doesn't really make sense for somebody to kind of like try to take advantage of that system. Because I agree, it's like everyone's trying to farm these airdrops, everyone's trying to pretend to be something real. And I think just being thoughtful about the hoops that you're making people jump through, is really a problem in a space that a lot of people are trying to solve.
I love the reputation building, identity building, like it's so important, but we're still in crypto, we're still so financially motivated that we have to find some way to like turn identity and reputation into some financial gain, because until that happens, I don't think, like what Alex was saying, like most people are still airdrop farmers. That's just the ugly truth. And so we have to find some way to reward that reputation and identity, and maybe then we'll get closer to what we want.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think like a lot of like DAOs are predicated on kind of economic contribution, and I think that's like super misaligned, right? Because it's like $1, 1 token, 1 vote. one, maybe somebody invested super early and they have a huge stake, and after 6 months, maybe they're not involved anymore, but
Yeah.
they're still like this like whale, right? And then two, it's people who either invested early or people who have a lot of capital. Those are the people who have say. Where we're like, I think if you predicate it kind of like engagement and reputation, and you start saying like they're the people who have more access, maybe more say, more voting control. I'm not saying it should be 100% either way, but I'm saying we should have a spectrum between those two: economic contribution and an engagement and direct physical contribution, right? And then somewhere on that line, that 60-40, 50-50, I think if we open that up, and like that's a much better model than I agree. Just like, I hold this token, right? Or I want this token, right? Because at the end of the day, if you put in 1,000 hours into my community and you want some tokens, I think that's very aligned. Most projects need that engagement, you know? They need some reasonable amount of money, but it's really engagement that I think is distinctly lacking for a lot of these projects.
That's great. And since we're short on time, final question, Anjali and Charlie, your answers are the most important here. Favorite tavern?
Oh
and
my
you can do
word.
favorite town hall if you really
Wait,
have one.
what? But I can't say my own because shout out to all the Collabland DAO members out there and members of our Discord community. So,
I meant literal tavern in Denver.
oh, literal tavern in Denver. I don't know. I have a startup in Denver, so I don't get out much.
Fair enough.
Probably, I like Denver Central Market's a good spot. I feel like there's a lot of stuff happening there.
Great. Yeah, so thanks again to all our panelists. This was a fantastic talk. Really appreciate you all being here. And if you haven't checked out any of these projects on the stage, all of them are fantastic, doing great things in the DAO space. So please do visit Collabland, visit Charmverse, check out Game 7, and then watch for some interesting experiments on Farcaster from Charlie.
Barworld.gg. That's the next one.
Love it. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Bill.